Hello, good evening. Here we are, Cam and Anurag. We will be discussing today episode 49 and 50 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. This is the last set of episodes of the series, and we will wrestle through our takeaways and have a dialogue on these two episodes today. And we'll conclude perhaps in a future episode some reflections that all three of us who have gone through this over literally 25 plus episodes, we can do a wrap up at the very end. Today, we will focus our attention on the two episodes 49 and 50. With that as setup, Cam, how do you want to kick us off?
So what I'm going to do is just read the very last paragraph from episode 50, where Vervaeke basically says, this is what I've tried to do over the course of this entire series. And then without pause, I'll go back to the beginning of episode 50 and I'll read the recap of episode 49 from the beginning of uh, episode 50. And then there were a number of key concepts from the two episodes that I'll open it up and see how you'd like to go from there. But I can definitely lead from there into some of the key ideas that I'm interested in anyway.
Awesome. Kick us off, Cam, and welcome, Michael.
Sorry, guys, I totally spaced it, and then I didn't have my phone on me, and then I came and looked at it and was like, "Oh my
It's
God,
okay.
we forgot." So
It's okay.
glad to
We
be
are
here.
recording and we kicked off, so join us.
All right,
Perfect timing, Michael. Glad you're here. Okay, so Vervaeke saying, what have I tried to show you? I've tried to show you that the language, the vocabulary, the grammar, the framework of relevance realization, and how it can be developed to talk about spirituality and sacredness can be put into deep dialogue with Heidegger, deep dialogue with Corbin, deep dialogue with Jung, deep dialogue with Tillich, deep dialogue with Barfield, and also for deep dialogue, critical but creative dialogue between them, and afford a potential synoptic integration. All of this is what I've meant by and what I mean by awakening from the meaning crisis. Okay, so that is what the attempt has been. And now I'm going to go to the beginning of episode 50. So I'm reading from page 1077 of the transcript we're working off of. 1077, 1078. So this is at the beginning of episode 50, Tillich and Barfield. So in episode 49, we looked in depth at Corbin and Jung, and I tried to draw out very deeply the notion of the relationship to the sacred second self. I launched into sort of a mutual criticism between Corbin and Jung and brought in some Buber along the way. And then I pointed to somebody whose work, also deriving from Heidegger, integrates aspects of all of these together in kind of a profound way. Tillich is deeply influenced and aware of what he calls depth psychology, the kind of psychology in Jung. He, of course, is deeply aware of Heidegger. I don't think that Tillich was aware of Corbin, but he is deeply aware of the symbol in an imaginal rather than in a merely imaginary way. Tillich takes the meaning crisis seriously. He writes, perhaps, his most well-known, and I think it's his masterpiece book, The Courage to Be, as a response to the meaning crisis. Like Jung and Corbin, and for very related reasons, he's deeply critical of literalism and fundamentalism throughout. But he takes it deeper, as I mentioned. He really deepens it in terms of Heidegger's critique of ontotheology. Excuse me, let me say that again. He really deepens it in terms of Heidegger's critique of ontotheology, and he becomes critical of literalism and fundamentalism as forms of idolatry in which we are attempting to have rather than become. So there are some excellent books on the relationship between Jung and Tillich. I don't think I need to go into the citations there. So I think that's enough to tee it up. So right away, the key concept there that I think it's central to what is referred to as the meaning crisis and the path to awakening, and that is this notion of the sacred second self.
It's a little hard to get around, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Vervaeke's renaming of what is it Corbin refers to as the divine double?
Jung's idea of sacred second self and Corbin's idea of the divine double.
Oh, I understood it as, I thought it was Vervaeke that coined the sacred second self, and you're saying that you think it's Jung.
That's my takeaway, but I don't know whether it's actually labeled as such by Jung or not. But Jung obviously had this idea of a self, and he with capital S.
Yeah.
Right. The higher self, right? Basically.
Yeah. So that's how I understood that. The capital L. So there's in Jungian. So I understand Jung. There's the egotistical sense of self. So that's lowercase s, and then there's the capital S self, which is, I think Vervaeke saying that's essentially the same thing as is a Corbin that calls it the divine double, and then Vervaeke says I don't like the divine in there. I got issues with that. I want to call it the sacred second self instead. That's how. Anyway, so whatever you want to call it. I guess I can't really say whatever because Vervaeke really is being very particular with language on purpose in his larger argument.
Yeah, he's being extremely precise about that. Well, I think he's that kind of thinker, right? I see something here when I just did a definition search that Heidegger referred to it as a shift in being, which is interesting. And other people say it's the divine self, like the Christian mystics and so on. And the process of individuation would be part of what Carl Jung said that was about, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay. So
You want to kick off with a question or an observation, either one of you?
Well, so I'm curious to understand how you guys think about that sacred second self. Like what is that?
For me, let's see, I'll just talk in my original sense of it as I've gone through my life, is that it's when I'm aligned with, how do I say, on the many levels that now I think Vervaeke talks about. It's not how I perceived it originally because I didn't have that complexity in my head, but it's kind of like what Jung says, or no, actually not Jung. I'm thinking of another psychologist that Jordan Peterson likes, Carl Rogers, which he says, if you are not aligned with what you think, say, feel, and do, you cannot be psychologically stable. And to me, it's, and I do believe it's beyond that as well, which is that if you have to be aligned with that which guides you towards the highest place, right? And when you're there, you feel different, you see the world differently, right? Everything shifts, and that would be also my new understanding, the idea of Miguel Chris saying you're right brain dominant rather than left brain dominant. So you're in the flow. You have a sense of the whole, the things you can't describe or even define are salient to you, that kind of thing. And for me, that means that I'm aligned with that which is best for me and the rest of the world as best I can at the moment, and moving towards something with deep meaning for me, which only comes, I find, from a deep honesty, that allows me to confront things that are in the way of that are hard to do, but are necessary to move towards that which I'm called to, something like that.
Requires courage.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the opposite of comfort, right? So it's actually, well, in a sense, there's a comfort in it, meaning that you feel settled and integral, but it's anything but it's a lower comfort. You're actually sacrificing the primal comfort for that higher thing. That's how I perceive it. Because all of a sudden you don't want to binge watch porn. It's just not worth you don't care anymore because you're going after this thing that feeds you. That the mode of being that you're in when you're going towards it feeds you on a level that kind of wipes out addictive urges, makes you not really give a shit if people approve of what you're doing or not. I mean, there's all kinds of things that seem to fall into place that normally seem like you don't have any control over, and all of a sudden they don't matter. Something like that.
So can you go? I don't know if you can remember it, but when you were making an attribution to Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
and you talked about I heard integrity. So you lined up several different things. It's like what you say,
Yeah,
what you do.
so Rogers said if you do not line up what you think, feel, say, and do, you
Think,
cannot
feel,
be
say, do. Think,
you cannot be
feel, say,
say
do.
and
Okay.
do. You cannot be psychologically stable. Those are necessary things for stability in psychology. It's like, you know, your own psychology. It's not going to be stable if any of those are off base, right? So and that makes sense because that's integrity, right? I mean, it's like, and
Yeah, you don't negate any of them. So the feeling one, the pre-linguistic,
mhm.
you
Yeah,
can
but the, you
say
know,
and you can say and do, and then realize as you're saying and doing that it's not lining up with how you actually feel.
absolutely, and that because that's that sort of thing that when you say that something that's not true, anyone that's in touch with their body at all feels that feeling of like it's almost like your body's saying that's total bullshit, and it does it in sensations. It doesn't do it in a word. It just says, you know, maybe you feel tightness in your throat or a pain somewhere or a headache. It depends on the person, or your stomach hurts because you're out of alignment. And then when you are in alignment, there's this sort of uplifting energy that I feel and a lightness, right? There's this lightness and sort of this, and that's the flow state to some degree at least. And so that's, and of course, flow state is also optimal challenge to your ability towards something of deep meaning for you, right? So that's the part as well. But you'll just get it. You have to be integral, and to be integral, you have to go towards that which is salient to you in a deep, meaningful way. Does that make sense?
It does. So you said that the optimal challenge to what did you say? How do you say that?
So when you're in flow state, the challenge is optimal to your level of ability, meaning it doesn't overwhelm you or underwhelm you, because either one doesn't actually. If underwhelmed, there's no growth. Overwhelmed, you get hurt or you get overwhelmed. It doesn't. It crashes you. It's like the system crashes, and you could even get traumatized or something like that in certain situations. But when you're at the optimate flow, it's like the surfer that catches the wave that's just hard enough to push his ability or hers to another level without hurting them, right? And
Yeah.
that's what you're trying. I think Vervaeke does talk about this, at least. I mean, he's so detailed that it maybe it's hard to find out where that was, but I'm pretty sure he knows that.
Yeah.
Because that's my understanding of the flow state is that it is the most optimal place for any human to be in their existence. And I agree with that, because when I read those books, I was like, oh my God, this is just absolutely right. Because when you're in flow state, you don't give an F about anything else. It's great. I mean, it's like the best thing ever. Someone's being, someone in your families or your partner's being difficult, and you're like, because I'm so satisfied with what I'm doing. That's like a minor irritation rather than something that takes you out. Makes you real. Oh, they don't. They're about to be nice to me, and you're all. Oh. It also protects you from my ideology, according to that book, True Believer, which I agree with that as well.
Hmm.
So
The one more thing, Anurag, you've been very patient. I want to add one more piece, and then I want to hear if you have more to say there or more to add on the sacred second self. So the piece in listening to you, Michael, in that flow state, what occurs to me is how the sensations in the body, the feelings, that optimal challenge is that I'm able to, like, my ability to make meaning out of them, to understand what the feelings mean, is pacing with the intensity of them, or the cascade of the
I'm
something.
not
There's something
sure.
like, I want to say tolerance. So I can tolerate so much dissonance, so to speak, in sensation in the body, feeling in the body, not understanding what they mean.
No,
And
I think
then I go over a point where it's like I'm overwhelmed. There's too much sensation, there's too much feeling, and the meaning making can't keep up.
Well, I mean, think about ice baths, right? When you hit it just right, it becomes euphoric rather than painful, right? So and that's a good metaphor, I think. And if it's too much, then it just hurts, and you get out and go, God, I hated that, right? But when it's optimal, you're like, you get out and you're like, dude, like I'm, just wow, and then the rest of the day is better because you had the optimal flow state, that pushed you just enough to put you in a state of sort of bliss in a way, which is odd because it's a very intense. So I think that's a decent model to some degree. But the body also tells you, well, we could go deep into this and we don't need to right now, but my experience is that the body is the portal to what your conscience is telling you. And therefore, if you do not have a good relationship with your body, you're not in touch with it, you, in metaphorically at least, and sometimes literally, depends what you believe, you can't hear God's voice. Because God's voice speaks through your body sensations, not your head. Your head is what argues with God, or the head is the left brain. I mean, not the whole, but like your conscious mind is the left brain. Your right brain is the sensations of, like you feel love or a desire to go on an adventure that doesn't make sense, that kind of thing. Your brain will argue, you can't do that, it's too inconvenient, and what. And then, but then the sense in here says, I need you to go over there, right? And so
Anurag?
Yeah, Anurag, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I agree with kind of what you've been describing as kind of the process of flow state as a mechanism for, are we currently oriented towards reality the right way, right? I think,
ultimately,
I think that was covered quite well in many of the early episodes where he talks at length, Vervaeke talks at length about flow state and the research around flow state, etc. I come back to this particular episode on Corbin and Jung, and that episode actually is focusing on something much harder and difficult. It's focusing on how self-transcendence happen. And flow state is not the mechanism. You can be in flow state all your life and not, because flow state says, I'm in good grip with the reality now, today, right now. Whereas Corbin and Jung, and particularly, they talk about how do you aspire to a higher level that you are not yet at. So how do you self-create? The paradox of self-creation. And over there, personal transformation is a participatory and emergent process. And that's where I think Corbin's idea first of a double divine, he says the way you aspire to become someone you're not yet is through the imaginal, through symbols, right? So it's a way that you look towards an imaginal figure. And coming from Sufism, there are a lot of imaginal, idealized version, whether it's a deity or a god or some symbol, even even directly not religious symbol, that allows you to aspire, which is not a rational process, not necessarily a flow state either, right? Which aspires, which allows you to become a better version of yourself over time by using that as a gateway, as a pathway, right? So that is kind of what, coming from Sufi mysticism and his idea of divine double, angel, or whatever you call it, right? And Jung's view is going deeper inside, and you use the term, which I think is appropriate, integrated. He says the whole idea of connecting with yourself is to be integrated with the parts that you're not aware of, or comfortable with, or your shadow, et cetera, et cetera. So that part is also psychological. And in his, he uses the term, like, in fact, James Hollis, who's the depth psychologist, who I read a lot, who is the best author on Carl Jung today. He talks about when you get the summons, like you have to pay.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, beautiful. When you pay heed to the summons.
I
And
like
that is
that.
his way of saying when you're called upon to do something that you are not yet ready to do, that's the what you were calling the conscience, the inner voice. And that's when you say, I can't ignore it. I have to go towards that self, the sacred self, that I'm not yet there. And I
Yeah.
need to see how I can take the parts of me that I've been suppressing, ignoring, etc., and
And
direct my energy towards that. So
that's the first.
both of those processes are psychological and emergent processes for both of them. But what's interesting is that the kicker Vervaeke says, and others says that it brings about an ontological transformation, not just a psychological one. It's not like you're just healthier, happier. You become a different being.
And did he say like what? I'm not the same. Vervaeke said, "I'm not the same person as I was when I was a baby."
Exactly. So in a
Even
certain
though
way, you've
that's
transformed. Yeah.
it's still Vervaeke, but it's a different level or different form. And I think the other thing that so that what you're talking about is the first step of the hero's journey, right? You have the calling, right? And then, but the thing that I think is that you're right about, Anurag, is that part of the hero's journey is you go into a state, a place of like the desert, right? And it's
Yeah.
really uncomfortable, like
Yeah.
because you don't know how to orient, right? You're in a
Yeah.
new,
Yeah.
and it can last a long time. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's not just like a
Yeah.
little tiny bit. It's sometimes it's this long period, and you have to stay the course somehow, aspiring towards that higher place and trusting that if you keep at it, you're going to finally kind of things are going to start come together and reorganize. But and I think it's one of the reasons so many people are very reluctant to do it is because it's really, really uncomfortable to go through that process.
And moreover, in addition to that, today, coming back to the meaning crisis, um, it is looked down upon to pursue symbolic structures as a way of transcendence, right? So, in
Absolutely.
a hyper rational, rationalistic view, it strips out symbols and meaning. So, uh, when you say, I'm going to concentrate 15 minutes on a figure of a deity, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a cross, whether it's a om, or whether
Yep.
it's a symbol that I consider sacred, right? That I'm going to use as a symbol for me to pray to, as a means to opening up the imaginable, that allows me to introspect and connect to the higher possibilities that I aspire to. The whole enterprise, the way I described it, is looked down upon.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. I
And
mean,
that's part of the challenge with the Jung's work is not accepted beyond a certain level. It's just psychological, machinery for helping you get over your depression. And something like Corbin would be rejected out of hand, like mysticism and Sufism, right? So that's the challenge today.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, and personally, I'm only very recently coming to know how to relate to symbols in a way that is aspirational because I was so deprived of that orientation, even through art school of all places, which I think is a real shame because now that I'm understanding what that is, I'm like, God, I mean, imagine if I'd grown up in a culture that not only encouraged it was all around me, that they actually taught me that. And I had to learn that on my own. I did learn some of it, but I never really got it until recently, where it's like that deep meaning that's in the symbol that calls you forth. And I'm like, yeah, this is a new thing for me. And it's I'm feeling very grateful to have finally come to a place of having of embodied sense of the usefulness of symbols. And
Let me ask
yeah.
you a provocative question to Cam and you as well, Michael. Using the question of symbols, right, as an example of symbols, do you have a symbol or a sacred altar for symbols where you pay attention to center yourself?
You mean like at home
Yeah.
sort of thing?
Yeah,
No, I
Yeah.
don't. I mean, I've never understood that, and I think eventually I will actually, but I couldn't feel it. I didn't know what that meant until now. But
Cam,
that's a good question, and I think that's something I should ponder actually. Now that you mention it, do you have one?
I want to hear from Cam. As he
Okay, go
said,
ahead.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a daily practice.
Yeah. I started that few months ago, and I'm finding it very helpful.
That's
Right. And
great.
again, it's a cultural, it's what's interesting is those icons or symbols are culturally grounded, whichever tradition you happen to come from, or whichever you ended up adopting along your life's
Mm.
path, right? And in my case, I grew up a practicing atheist, and I still consider myself to be a non-theist, the way Vervaeke describes it. But I rejected the baby and the bathwater by rejecting all symbols, right? Hyper rationalist. So now I think I'm rediscovering the power of coming back to some Vedantic and some other symbols from my tradition, and using that as a portal, as a way of paying attention to what I want to reflect on. So it's and I never would have thought that it would make a difference. It's a practice like Cam. I would love to know more. That actually helps me start the day and close the day.
Yeah. So I would love to try to, well, how about there is no try? Do or do not. So as clumsy as we may be, I propose we play with thinking from first principles there a little bit
Yep.
amongst ourselves. And I'm pretty sure it was in one of these two episodes where Vervaeke makes the assertion, I think, about Jung, that Jung was pointing out that the symbols themselves, so I'm picking up where you said they're culturally grounded. And I think that Jung, my understanding of Jung is that not exactly. And I think Vervaeke asserts on behalf of Jung in these episodes that symbols are self-organizing phenomena themselves.
Hmm.
Does
Interesting.
that ring any bells with you guys?
Self-organizing with
I don't.
themselves.
I didn't see it that way.
I don't remember that either, but I'm not saying
Yeah,
it
but
wasn't, but I
nor do I recall Jung saying. I think Jung says there are universal archetype patterns that he talks about, but the actual manifestation of a symbol could be culturally contextual. For example, if it's a cross, it's a Christian, and that's the tradition you come from, that could be one, right?
Well, the cross predates Christianity
Or
by a lot.
so that's what I meant. Like the culture in which you were coming from. If I'm coming from Hindu culture and I have Om as a symbol or as a deity, right? That becomes a symbol to which I can attach, right? In some cases, if you go back to Greek times, it could be as simple as a fire, right?
Mhm.
Like in many religions. So the point I'm simply making is that I don't think there is any quote unquote, there's a universal need for that, which I think Jung is speaking to as an archetype. But I don't think he's talking about how it gets manifested. And manifestation can be anything from burning bush to fire to a lamp to deities of gods that you happen to use as a pathway, or in pantheism, it could be even objects that you come to, relics and objects, right?
Yes.
Well,
That's how I took
so
it. That's how I understood it.
Cam, I just searched this in chat, and an idea that is that Jungian archetypes follow that example. I mean, it'd be self-organizing within subconscious in relation to the symbol, which I think is probably the same thing. So that's an interesting, really interesting concept to bring up.
Yeah, I guess the point that I'm making is that it's not, my sense is that it's a mistake to think that the symbol is artificial, as in
Right.
made at the hand of man, even though man may play a part in the creation, in the what the elaboration of the symbol, that the symbol is there along with man.
Well, it already exists within us, and the symbol somehow inspires that pattern of being to activate or to complexify. I think that's my interpretation of what you just said.
Yeah, so it's like the piece of art. So a true artist it's the art is coming through them. It's not like they're making it. It's passing. They're participating in the manifestation of it in the fabric of
I mean,
reality itself.
they're in a relationship with that symbol, which is bidirectional, right? So it's not like the symbol's a dead item, is what you're saying, right?
Right. So and Vervaeke, he's big on that participatory notion. So there's a participatory, and he talks when he's talking about Jung in these episodes, he makes the point that Jung's sense of the archetype is an adverbial sense, not adjective.
Yes.
Then there's a participatory.
Yes. I'm agreeing with 100% of what you're saying, Cam. I was making a different point. I was not saying, I was saying the symbol gets meaning because of the participatory nature between the human and the symbol, right? That's why it's not like it's not a passive thing that just hangs over there. In that regard, it is an active, participatory, experiential thing that allows you to aspire through the symbol to something behind it and beyond it. That part I agree with. All I was saying was the specific symbol that happens to work for you, for your pathway, might vary a lot by culture, right? For you, it might be a cross that does that participatory engagement. For me, it could be something else. And culturally and historically, in all religious societies, symbols have played a role of inviting that participation towards transcendence. But the specific object and the symbol itself has been chosen from many different areas, and the object per se is not important as such, but the pathway and how it engages you is the important part. Is all I'm saying. So I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. I wasn't. That's all.
No, that's well said, and it's interesting because it's only in this last year that the cross now I understand it as a symbol that can help me, which is very surprising given my background, I have to tell you, my anti-religious family and so on and so forth.
So in Hindu culture, for example, mantras, like literally verses, sacred verses that are sung, like they act as that. Om, the humming of Om acts as that. And various figures of gods that you happen to align with, practices, act as that, right? As can some sacred objects that you have chosen to make sacred, so to speak, act as that.
Well, you brought attention to the Persian poetry too last time.
Yes.
Like that's really, for me, that's a pretty direct path.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not so much a path, because I liked how you also said you were starting to describe the practice of, I think you said, contemplating or meditate upon a particular deity.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure in these episodes, Vervaeke, he talks about it as, when you do that, you're literally taking it into your cognitive process. Like it is becoming part of you.
Yeah. 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 He talks about daemon in some of the later things when Vervaeke talks about a personal relationship with what he calls a daemon later on, not in this series. And that is his daemon, right? That daemon meaning divine double. He doesn't use that term, but in his case, that's as close as he's going to call it, which is daemon, right?
That's because
with whom he has a conversation, an ongoing relationship. And that is his inner sage somehow expressed in a mythical psychological entity that visits him and he engages with it.
Is that the original meaning of daemon is spirit?
Exactly.
And that's what Socrates told him what not to do, right? So yeah, that's
exactly
interesting. Yeah, I like that. Wow.
Switching to the next one, which is the Tilak and Barfield. I've not read Tilak. I'm intrigued enough to perhaps read his book Courage to Be. Have any of you read that? Cam, have you read that?
No,
I have not.
Look it up.
But what I really found very interesting is that so clear that he talked about not being belief system, right? It's
Yeah.
he talks
Yeah.
about it not being a set of beliefs at all, but a set of symbols through which you have the courage to change yourself, which is interesting. And the ground of being ontological rather than supernatural.
Yeah. So paperback, is it short?
It seems very short, 180 pages or something, and
Oh, okay.
relatively
That's not
inexpensive.
too outrageous, is it?
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I've not, but
Oh, you
as
have.
I was
Oh,
preparing for today's episode, I found that very interesting. You know what it reminded me, which I can't tell you whether it's true or not because I've not compared the both of them and I've not read Tillich's work, is the James Carr's book on the case against religious belief.
oh,
Fantastic book. That's the book I read about 6 months ago. The case against religious belief.
okay.
Fantastic provocation, James Carse. All right. And he's a theologian. I would say I can't technically compare and contrast to Tillich's theology since I've not read it, but it resonated with me.
Was it the moral case against? Is it
No,
Sharp? No, someone
no,
else.
no.
The
The
case.
case, James Carse, Carse, James Carse, the case against
There
religious,
he is. Okay, got
the
it.
case against religious belief. And that his central point is pretty similar to what I understood to be Tillich's, that religion has not much to do with the specific set of belief system you need to buy into, so to speak, which is provocative.
Hmm. Very
Anyway,
interesting. Okay, that's
So before we run out of time, um,
hmm. Yeah.
shucks, I lost it. There was another part in here that I was going to ask you guys' help with. Um, I guess I'm too tired. I can't. I had it a moment ago. I'll see if I can bring it back. But I will pick up on this idea of the ultimate virtual engine. Did you guys pick up on that? Let me do a keyword search here. See if I can find it in context.
he described that when he was talking about relevance realization.
Yeah, it did. That was back a bit, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at page 1071. So it's right at the top. So if I read it in context here, yeah, this is on Jung. So the ego is the archetype of the conscious mind. The ego is the virtual engine that regulates the self-organization of the conscious mind. What is the capital self? Well, it's kind of the archetype of the archetypes. It's like Plato's notion of the good, which is the form for how to be a form, the eidos of the eidos. It is the virtual engine regulating the self-organization of the psyche as a whole. It is the principle. The capital S self is the principle of autopoiesis itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ultimate virtual engine that constellates all the other virtual engines so that the psyche can continue its process of autopoietic self-organization. Remember, when a system is self-organizing, its function and its development are completely merged. Okay, so this was the point. This was where I was going to ask for some help. When a system is self-organizing, its function and its development are completely merged.
Mm-hmm.
It develops by functions and its functions by developing. So this functional model is simultaneously a developmental model. That's what makes it aspirational. It is simultaneously functional and developmental. So I was thinking about this in the context of so there's the psyche and there's the body and they're conjoined.
Right.
And okay, it's coming back to me now because the other thing he makes a big deal about the evolution of language and of understanding what things mean. So, and he used the example of attack. You guys remember that? Like he used the word attack. So
Yes.
you have the attack in that physical sense, and then he also talked about like attacking. I forget what it was, but it was in the abstract. It was like you attack a system of ideas. You argue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he used it in that context. So you're going to attack an idea. And he says, isn't that kind of crazy that we can use it in that way, right?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm just barely grasping what he's getting at there. And I think this is why this is going back to his closing remarks to the whole series where he talks about the language, the grammar. And he also makes the point about he cites Pajot in one of these two and says he thinks that Pajot is talking about contemporarily how Christianity itself is going through a process of death and resurrection.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's something that's if that's not the deepest system of meaning making, if Christianity, if Christendom isn't an engine of, if it isn't the deepest, like the most capable system of making meaning, it's right up there. Like I'm biased. Like I don't see a better one, but I'm
We can,
open.
yeah, we can go.
So
So
the
you're
point,
taking that, you're taking those steps from Jung. I'm just trying to make sure I follow your chain of what you're
well,
searching.
so the chain, I guess what I'm getting at, so back to me, I think about the idea of functional and developmental. So I'm peculiar in the sense that I want to both develop my body and I want the things that my body to be doing are functional, and that's manifest in my life in building things with my body. Like I was deeply drawn to the trades as a child and wanted to develop my capacity to build shelter fundamentally. So I built houses for a while, like right away. That was the first thing that I was drawn into as I moved from adolescence into adulthood. And that was developing both my body, and that my body got stronger as a consequence of doing the physical labor. And it was functional, as in I was producing shelter. And I'm coming back to that now, in my 50s, and I've been largely in the abstract and developing the what the higher order cognitive functions, the ability to think, really, mostly. And I'm finding myself attracted again back into the more physical practices. Like I actually want to go back and build things with my own hands again. And that's happening at the same time that I'm going through the EMP stuff, where I'm learning how much of my capacity to find meaning in life has to do with how dexterous and how skilled I am in moving through whatever is happening in the real world, like moving the body skillfully, gracefully, joyfully through whatever that is. And that feels like a compound. It feels like an engine. It feels like, okay, structure your life, structure the behaviors such that both the body, the mind, and the world around me are all simultaneously, as a consequence of what I'm doing and how I am in the world, is both developmental and functionally sound. That was kind of a bunch of word salad, but that's.
I got it. No,
Thanks for
I think
listening.
I follow you there. It's I've heard this concept before we even did this course, right? And it's again, it's this kind of ultimate alignment, right? In a sense. Um, so, and I can relate to what you're saying very much. Because it's not a fragmented process. No, right? I mean, I always like to cook, right? And it has
Yeah.
multiple functions, right? It's nurturing. I mean, if you do it right. But I like interacting with the food items and transforming them and it's very creative.
Yeah.
And it's sensory too, because you feel or smell, and and then it's visual too. So the way you chop the things and how they end up on the plate, and then how it tastes, and you share it with someone else. So there's another dimension, right? You share it with other people, and then it's connective, and so it's and like you build a shelter, and then you're in the shelter. It's like,
Yeah,
right?
you can host people in the shelter.
Yeah, you can have your friends come in, and oh, you built this, wow, and then you can hang out at your clubhouse or whatever. So that's participatory,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I agree with the way you are summarizing. I take that to be the pattern of growth that he's pointing to, as like both like using Jung's work. It's a pattern of growth from inside, integrating uh, and aspiring while developing. So the fact that we are poetic, and we become, with the right focus and right cycle of engagement and participation and alignment, higher than what we were before, and transform ourselves. I see all of that as being described as a synthesis of Vervaeke's work across all these thinkers. I think, however, point where I take a departure from Vervaeke and this course is that Vervaeke is careful about not getting into the ontological basis,
Yeah, he
right?
sure is.
Right? Whereas
tiptoes
I
around
think,
that.
and I think seriously, he goes very close. He uses the term secular in a non-theist sense, meaning he's talking about the ecology of practices that give you grounding and meaning. In that, he uses all the, I would say, frameworks like Gnosis and Neoplatonism, and the frameworks of Corbin or Carl Jung. So he uses all of that apparatus, right, to get you to say, okay, you need to be more than what you are. You're not materialist, right? But he then stops short of metaphysical, ultimate ontological questions, I think, by his choice. Maybe he has evolved and he has some points of view that he, quote unquote, doesn't want to get into. But to me, that's where I personally am at this point. I think that some of the spiritual practices and moving from not having meaning to figuring out ecology of practices that get you meaning, very much along the kind of work you're doing, the way Cam described it. In the last 3 years, I've been teaching and mentoring, and I have found the more I go out and teach and mentor, the more deeply satisfying. I find my parts of me that I could not express and fully integrate now much more integrated in how I teach and write and coach. So I think, like Cam was saying, and like Michael, you were saying, I think there's a process that unlocks that is ever-ending, functional, and growth all combined.
Yeah.
I do think where all of that points to is a completely set of next level of conversations, which get you into ontology or like a metaphysics, or your view of reality from some practice. I don't know yet how to go about it, but that can get pretty deep into how interested are you in the metaphysics.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I do appreciate it. It feels to me like he presents this material in a very disciplined manner, and that he very deliberately doesn't go over that line. He does that expressly.
I mean, he's even said that directly.
Yep.
I'm just not going there. It's like, and he's not even commenting on either way. It's just, I'm
I
just not
actually
doing it.
think he thinks that's a different project.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what he.
Not so much that he doesn't want to go. He just thinks that going down that path is a different project, and different people will have different projects around that. You could subscribe to, for example, when he engages with Jordan Peterson, right? He's very clear about separating out the explicit Christian faith, right? Not a set of beliefs, but faith, right?
Yep.
Different word that Peterson has and he's using in his theology from alternative ways, right? Like Socratic or ancient or Hindu or Buddhist, whatever, right? So each of those could open up different metaphysical conversations. And he is and in fact, Vervaeke is pretty good about it. He says, I grew up without taking stance on it, Christian roots, but practices Buddhism, practices as well. So he's trying to come up to his own personal mashup of what that uh, ontological reality for him is, without committing to it or without bringing it into public.
Also, Vervaeke, he's part of the Gospels discussion
Yeah.
with Pearson, and I actually like all the people there, but Vervaeke's he's really great about like honestly, kind of sussing things out and wanting help too. He's like, help me figure this out.
Yeah.
I can't get it straight, and they do, and he wrestles with it. I respect him for that highly, actually.
It's funny because I'm wrestling with the same set of questions beyond awakening from the meaning crisis, meanings set of frameworks. And for me, it has been going down the Vedantic tradition of non-dualistic Vedantic tradition of Hinduism, ancient Hinduism. And that to me has been the next set of doors that are opening, right? But that's outside of all the frameworks we've talked about, because that starts getting directly into metaphysics.
Funny, because I know nothing of that. It's like it's complete blank
Yeah.
territory for me.
Yeah. What's only connection so far in the 50 chapters we have gone through would be the use of the word self with a capital S. Right?
That's the
Carl
only thing.
Jung's word, he borrowed that from the Vedantic view of self, but uses it psychologically, not metaphysically, which is different. Right?
Wow.
And the only other places, Schopenhauer, as well as Heidegger and others were familiar with some of the Vedantic 4,000-year-old set of thoughts that made consciousness more primary than the reality of material objects. So they borrow some of those concepts and they've slipped in, because those are ancient traditions, right? They've slipped in through the work of Heidegger, Schopenhauer, and Carl Jung into the 50 episodes that we have discussed. But they're not central to this discussion, because this entire discussion came from meaning crisis from the Western civilizational sense. The whole project came out of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't start with meaning crisis in India, for example, because the frameworks would have been, and history would have been so different, or China or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Anyway,
right.
maybe these were originally, before you joined, Michael, we said this is our last episode because we are now wrapping up the 50 episodes. And if we have 5-10 minutes more, we can kind of pause and perhaps zoom out and reflect on bunch of the series as a whole, the whole series as a whole, and see what we want to capture as those thoughts.
Sure. That sounds good.
So for me, the project here is the project of understanding how I realize relevance and how others realize relevance. So the practice of going through this material makes that increasingly explicit, increasingly conscious. So there's a conscious awareness that is of the salience landscaping going on all the time. And there's a deepened sense of curiosity about how that's occurring, even as it is occurring.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Michael, what your reflections on the whole series? Or
Well, the whole series opened me up in many different dimensions to things that I was not aware of and had not been put in this sort of context. I'm extremely grateful to Vervaeke for how he started the series and traced certain traditions and ways of meaning making through time, which I had never seen. No, I'd never done anything like this, and helped me understand what unique things like Christianity brought and many other traditions brought to the table. That even like the idea of agapic love in Christianity being absolutely brand new to the world, the Western world at least. And I was like, I didn't know that. There's all these things I didn't know. But and I'm also really grateful for him to introduce practices, orientations, and structure to something that I had gone through before, but didn't know how to describe very well. And giving me more tools. And I still feel very overwhelmed by everything I've gone through. And it's not like if someone said, tell me what that course is about, that I could actually just pull it out of my pocket and go, oh yeah, here it is. Let me just sit down. Let me tell you about it. I mean, it's still a little hard. But I think, again, that I don't, that's not a problem. It's actually, it's working on me. So it's kind of funny, like you talk about the symbol.
Yeah.
The course itself has a logos that is working on me, and I have felt the effect of it in a relationship with me, with the work, and with you guys, and in my life, how I'm living my life. There's a relationship between all those elements that are really dynamic and very interesting to observe over time. And the thing that I'm very grateful for is, by some, it almost feels like kind of miraculous, I find myself going through the processes that Vervaeke talk about more distinct than ever. Maybe just because I can track it, but I think it's actually more fluid, even though I don't feel like I fully understand what it is. And I think that speaks again to what we're saying about symbols and other things, is that they actually have, they're not flat, they're alive, right? So his ideas and the ideas he brings in and the way he structures it has a certain life to it that I'm relating to, that we're relating to, that is working on me without me even exactly trying to, which I think is profound. I mean, I have felt it, and I continue to feel it working. And I'm grateful for it, because it's for the better. Absolutely for the better. So that's my
I second the gratitude. Like, it is the opportunity to participate with the two of you through this whole ingestion, really.
Yeah. Yes.
Ingestion, integration, and then continued practice. It really, I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity to do that with you.
It's a profound experience, and something that I've been hoping for a long time. I'm really grateful that I was able to find you guys, and that, by some crazy quirk, we all agreed to go on this journey, which it's a lot to take on. It's like, I mean, it's not like we said, oh, we're gonna, do something easy and hang out. It's like we're like going to study this really deep shit, and it's hard to keep up with it. And sometimes I come here, I don't feel like I have anything to offer, but I discover I actually do, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like we help carry each other along the journey. Someone might be falling down, and we'll carry them for a little while, and then someone else, and then other times we're all perky. It's been really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you, Anurag, for
Yes, thank you, both of you, because
instigating.
I want to start by saying, look, when kind of we all three of us said, let's give it a shot. I wasn't sure how long it will go, whether it'll peter out, whether we'll stick
Right.
together. And like both of you, I really, really start by acknowledging and thanking both of you for the fact that three of us could hang together for such a long time and plow through the material. And for me, it has been very, very satisfying to participate where each of you is coming from such a different background than mine, and yet we have come to a place where we are grappling with the same issues, and so it's been very eye-opening, mind-opening for me, because that logos, that activity of engaging together has been deeply satisfying. And on a personal front, what I take away is that my personal stage of life, I had a bifurcation in my life when I grew up in India, and I had certain spiritual practices that I had observed, practiced perhaps as a child, and at some level put them on the shelf and said, those are not really interesting to me, because to me those seemed irrational in my atheistic days, and I rejected the whole bundle. I rejected the whole bundle. And for next decades, I observed, imbibed all the Western history, philosophy, art, etc. And those, while I benefit from that culturally and all that, that left me also not getting to what I thought would be a meaningful state. To me, Vervaeke was mind-blowing because he was the first person who explained the West to me in a way that it was, I didn't have to commit to a spiritual, I didn't have to say, oh, you have to be a Christian, or you have to be, Presbyterian, or you have to be, believe in a certain faith coming from the West to appreciate everything that he laid out. So to me, that was mind opening and such a wonderful way for me to get to relevance realization and to the frameworks he has synthesized of several thousand years into these 50 lectures.
Yeah.
And what paradoxically that has done for me is that while he has gotten me to this curtain of, how to get meaning out of daily practice, it has awakened in me over the last 1 year while I'm going through this with you, a spiritual practice of picking up what I had left as a child. So I'm now going back to my spiritual heritage and Vedanta and Hindu philosophy, and I'm picking up some of those symbols, the rituals, the texts, and I'm still. I said I'm trying to make sense of what's behind the curtain metaphysically, coming from that religious path, but this path opened this door. So I don't know where both of those would be. Maybe they are the two sides of the same curtain. I don't know. But I'm really, really thankful for that kind of journey so far. And
That's
you've been
terrific.
obviously fellow travelers with me. So that has been fantastic.
That's
Yeah,
such
it's
a great
lovely.
sharing, Anurag. What a journey. I mean,
It's a
wow.
path we are on. We are all on.
Yeah.
If I may just say one more thing about, there is, in Vedanta, there is a word called moksha, which is same as nirvana in Buddhism, which is ultimate release, right? Which is the goal of any spiritual quest. Any spirit, it's called moksha or nirvana. If you're Buddhist, you call it nirvana. And the point is, not everybody has the desire for spiritual journey.
I
And the
agree.
fact that some of us do is already a gift. I don't know where it comes from, but not everybody has that. And we know that. Three of us know that, right? The world is full of people who just are happy with whatever is happening, reacting to it. There's no bigger question to be sought or addressed, and they move on. They pass on. Whereas I think some small percentage of people wake up to that quest. And I think that's interesting to me. And I think everybody who responds to the meaning crisis is effectively waking up to a spiritual quest.
Ah,
I couldn't agree
nice.
more. Absolutely. I think it's a necessary, why else would you? It's like, again, it's not a comfortable thing, at least in certain measurements, right? So why would you go through all that discomfort and disruption? So, wow. So now, what do we want? I know we got to go in a minute, but
Let me
you
stop the
want to,
recording and we can
yeah,
decide at that point what we do next. Is that okay?
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.